On February 15, 2011, the people of Libya followed the example set by the peoples of Tunisia, Egypt, and Yemen, and began a broad-based protest against the country's dictator, Muammar Gaddafi. Gaddafi's security forces, supplemented by foreign mercenaries, began a violent crackdown on the protesters as a civil war began to brew. Gaddafi's denunciation of the protesters did little as armed conflict began to sweep the country. By the 23rd of February, Benghazi, the country's second-largest city, had fallen to the rebels. The rebellion soon morphed into open warfare. Under continuing pressure from Gaddafi's forces, the Libyan rebels called on the UN to act. On March 17th, the United Nations Security Council voted 10-0 to institute a no-fly zone over Libya. The resolution, the relevant text of which is on the screen, sought to gain a ceasefire and, specifically, institute a no-fly zone in order to clear the skies of Gaddafi's aircraft. The dictator had used his aircraft to target civilians and rebels in the country. The resolution resulted in the entrance of the international community into the conflict. This video, though, will look at how historical precedents of humanitarian intervention created the context for the decision of the United Nations to become embroiled in the civil war. For this film, we will use the definition of humanitarian intervention as articulated by J. L. Holsgreve. Humanitarian intervention is the threat or use of force across state borders by a state or group of states aimed at preventing or ending widespread and grave violations of the fundamental human rights of individuals other than its own citizens, without the permission of the state within whose territory force is applied. The first major case of humanitarian intervention in the modern era occurred in 1827 with the European intervention into the Greek War of Independence. Ostensibly due to the apparent atrocities of the Turks against the Greeks, the French, British, and Russians intervened in this harbor and fought the Turks in the Battle of Navarino, destroying the Ottoman fleet. However, the intervention occurred in part due to fears by the British that not intervening would allow Russia a free hand in dominating the Balkans. Following this in 1860, the French decided to intervene in Syria. Following the killing of thousands of Christians by Druzes and Muslims in Syria, the European powers forced the Ottomans to allow Western soldiers into Syria to quell the conflict. The French occupied Damascus from August 1860 to June 1861, helping to establish the autonomy of Lebanon under a Christian governor nominated by the Ottoman Sultan. In April 1876, the uprising of Bulgarians against the Central Ottoman authorities sparked another crisis. Due to the harsh repression of a Bulgarian revolt by the Turks and the deaths of over 10,000 Christians, the Russian Empire saw an opportunity to intervene in order to protect the population and improve its position in the Balkans. In 1877, the Russians declared war on the Ottomans and defeated them. Despite the ostensible humanitarian impulses of the intervention, European powers recognized Russia's attempt at a land grab in the Balkans, as reflected in this watchful Britain in this political cartoon from the period. The powers thus gathered, and in 1878's Treaty of San Stefano reeled in Russian gains while providing for de facto Bulgarian independence. Humanitarian intervention would emerge as a major tool of international policy following the darkness of the Second World War. With the creation of the United Nations in 1945, the UN codified the principle of such intervention in Chapter 7, Article 42 of the UN Charter. The Charter stated that the UN's new Security Council may take such action by air, sea, or land forces as may be necessary to maintain or restore international peace and security. Such action may include demonstrations, blockade, and other operations by air, sea, or land forces of members of the United Nations. Yet this new principle of interventionism ran into a potential obstacle from Article 2, Section 7. This passage articulated a policy in favor of the supremacy of national sovereignty in issues of domestic jurisdiction. This debate between the rights of sovereign states and the necessity of humanitarian intervention would dominate the debate over this issue in the years to come. This tension between sovereignty and interventionism first emerged over the UN peacekeeping operation in the Congo. United Nations Security Council Resolution 161 authorized the use of UN forces to intervene into the breakaway state of Katanga in order to reincorporate it into the Congo during the 1960s crisis. In addition to humanitarian efforts, the resolution resulted in violence between Katangan forces and the UN. The bloody nature of this reincorporation of a breakaway state into the Congo proper still raises questions over the nature of what constitutes a truly humanitarian intervention. Throughout the 1960s until the end of the Cold War, UN peacekeeping efforts tended to avoid outright humanitarian intervention, focusing primarily on peacekeeping in regions such as West New Guinea and Cyprus.